Journalism Institute at the University of Missouri. Welcome to Global Journalist. I'm Jason McClure. This summer, the U.S. Supreme Court will render its decision on gay marriage in the U.S. It's one of the biggest cases the High Court has heard in years and could determine whether gay marriage will be legal and recognized nationwide. But other countries in the Western Hemisphere have already beat the U.S. when it comes to legalizing same-sex marriage nationwide. 3 South American nations, Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay, have already legalized it, while 2 others, Colombia and Ecuador, have some protections for same-sex couples. In Mexico, same-sex marriage is legal in some jurisdictions and not in others. Elsewhere in Latin America and the Caribbean, gays enjoy few, if any, legal protections, much less marriage rights. Today on Global Journalist, we look at gay rights in Latin America and the Caribbean, how it compares to the U.S., and what forces are shaping the debate in the region. Our first guest today from San Francisco, Elisabeth Friedman, a professor of politics and the director of Latin American Studies at the University of San Francisco. She's also the author of Unfinished Transitions, Women and the Gendered Development of Democracy in Venezuela. And from Jamaica, Annecka Marshall, a lecturer in the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies. Thank you both for joining us. Elisabeth J. Friedman, historically we've thought of Latin American nations as having sort of this macho culture, and yet here we see that in Uruguay, Brazil, Argentina, gay marriage has been legalized nationwide. What's led to this shift in the landscape, and why are these countries, have they moved faster than the United States, than countries in parts of Western Europe?
Well, I think there are a lot of factors that have gone into the legal victories that LGBT movements have experienced in these particular countries. And I start with focusing on the role of the movements, because in all of these countries, you do see social activism coming out of a real history of generalized movement activity. So, for example, in Argentina, the case I'm most familiar with, the LGBT rights movement was really inspired by and nurtured by general movements for human rights going all the way back to the Dirty War. So that's a context in which people are very active in fighting for their rights and understanding them as human rights. So that's one of the biggest factors, I would say, that contributes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, in Argentina, President Kirchner, she came out in favor of gay rights, saw it as a winning political issue for her. In the United States, President Obama, of course, famously did not say that he was in favor of gay marriage until after he was elected.
Sure. But Kirchner took a lot of convincing. She was not on board for several years. Her husband was not on board. And that really was a success, again, from the movement side, that not only reached out for public opinion and to sort of stimulate debate on the radio and TV shows, that kind of thing, but also really went to through every possible channel they could. They used the court system. They, of course, worked through the legislature. And then they also appealed to the executive for her support.
And, of course, one of the most outspoken opponents, at least in Argentina, of gay marriage was the Archbishop of Argentina, then known as Jorge Bergoglio. Most of us know him now as Pope Francis. He led the opposition to gay marriage there, called it a destructive attack on God's plan. Now he's Pope. He's not viewed, he hasn't made news in the same way for his opposition to gay marriage, to gay rights, as he was previously in Argentina, it seems.
Well, at first, he seemed to have a very almost conciliatory attitude around these things. I think in part, he started to set a tone where he wanted to de-emphasize some of the more controversial stands that the church has taken. Well, not controversial for the church, but for society, really focusing so much on abortion and equal marriage rights. He wanted to focus more on poverty, some of the more general issues that affect so many people and so many Catholics around the world. But more recently, I know that he had some statements when he visited Manila in the Philippines, where he again affirmed the strong stance against equal marriage.
Annecka Marshall, you are in a part of the Caribbean, Jamaica, that is known for being particularly hostile, not just to sort of legal protections for gays, but that there's quite a difficult sort of cultural environment for gays, lesbians, bisexual, transgender people. Tell us what the climate is like in Jamaica.
Okay, before I do so, I just wanted to refer to Elizabeth's comments in terms of, legalization and everything. And I just wondered to what extent you could say that class has something to do with this. Because when I went to Brazil, I was given the impression that although there's a certain liberal attitude amongst middle class people, if you were university educated, for the average working class Brazilian, homophobia was still a problem.
In other words, has there just been a shift sort of in the middle class at the elite levels, whereas the working class, the poor, are not as tolerant of gay rights then?
I think that Annecka puts her finger on something extremely important, which is that the progress that we've seen in Latin America is remarkable, but it is legal progress in a few countries. So whenever we're thinking about that type of progress, we have to think about it in context, which is who wants to get married, for whom is this the most important legal right that they can access. Now, it is extremely important, and I do think it has an effect on public opinion. But at the same time, we cannot be, we must be aware of the, sort of the day-to-day situation of most LGBT people, particularly, for example, trans folk, who experience very high levels of violence in all of the countries that we're looking at. And there's still a lot of violence, on the part of the police when it comes to LGBT populations. And so I do think that it's very important to think about this in context and think about, how often legal achievements are not necessarily followed immediately by social acceptance.
And Annecka Marshall, if you could pick up on this point, I understand that there was an attack in Jamaica on a transgendered youth where he was beaten up by some other youths, and then when she went to report this to the police, was also beaten by the police.
Okay, you're referring to two cases, because the transgender youth, he was actually at a party and murdered, whereas the other case refers to university students going to security guards and then getting attacked. So I'll address each one differently.
Please do.
So in 2013, in July 22nd, Dwayne Jones, a 17-year-old transgender youth who was very popular in terms of the dancehall scene, went to a party dressed as a woman, and the men who were dancing with him didn't realize that, that actually, that this person was male. And so a woman who would have known the fatal consequences, actually said to someone at the party, this person is not a woman. And so Dwayne was searched, and he was taken away from the party. A mob beat him up, chopped him, stabbed him, shot him, burnt him, and ran over him by a car. And then his remains were just left in the bushes. And as is the case with most to all of these situations, the police don't really do anything substantial in terms of following up the case. So still, although people would know who was responsible for the murder of Dwayne Jones, nothing will result. And the rationale for it, according to Jamaican culture, would be, well, he knew what the consequences would be. It's a heterosexual space. And he was transgressing the lines of decent behavior. And as a result, his so-called deviance deserved to be punished in order to reaffirm the status quo, so that the men who felt that they were deceived by dancing with him could reaffirm their machismo, as it was mentioned before, by showing that they were heterosexual and showing patriarchy in the actual murder of him. And so whilst the case received international condemnation, in Jamaica, the basic argument was, well, if you go in to, a place where there's blatant homophobia, dressed as a female, then, you basically know that there's going to be terrible repercussions. The other case you referred to was a student at UTech, and that's the University of Technology, in which two males were found in, well, in England we call it toilet, but here they call it restroom, and they were. We don't really know what was happening, but anyway, someone who went into the toilet claimed that they were involved in some sort of sexual behavior, and as soon as that was said, people came on and actually started to attack them. They managed to run away and alert the authorities. And when they called the security guards, the same security guards proceeded to join the students in attacking
Oh, that's a very
this
disturbing incident.
couple. Yes.
I just want to remind our listeners, this is Global Journalist. Today we're talking about gay rights in Latin America and the future of gay rights in the region. Joining me from San Francisco is Elisabeth Friedman, a professor of politics and the director of Latin American Studies at the University of San Francisco. And from Jamaica, Annecka Marshall, a lecturer in the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies. If you're interested in more Global Journalist content, visit us online at globaljournalist.org. There you can read in-depth articles on international affairs and free press issues and download past episodes from our archive. We're also on social media. You can like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at Global Journ. Elisabeth J. Friedman, tell us just a little bit about how the use of social media has changed attitudes about gays, lesbians, transgender people in Latin America. How has it led to some of these political victories that we've seen?
Well, I do think that it has been incorporated in very effective ways in the cases that I'm familiar with in terms of reaching out for public opinion, but also centrally in the ways in which activists wield it to be in touch with each other. Urgent actions, spreading news of issues such as the issues that Annecka just brought up. When cases are happening, they can mobilize much more quickly. They can distribute information about campaigns going on, whether those campaigns are legal campaigns or social campaigns, more action-oriented, of course, distributing petitions for what those are worth. But I do think it's extremely important to point out that social media is not in itself a progressive tool only available to those who are seeking social justice. It is also very effective for people who, for example, are mobilizing against LGBT rights in Latin America so that they can also be in touch and distribute their forms of information. And, for example, so that they can lobby their Congress people when a particular bill is going through the legislative process. So it's not that social media in itself has caused these kinds of changes, but social media is a very important part of the picture.
Annecka Marshall, you were just describing a couple very horrifying incidents. Tell us about the general climate then in Jamaica, given that it's one of the more difficult places for gays and lesbians in Latin America. Do you see that things are starting to change? I know that your prime minister several years back had said that he would never have a gay person in his cabinet, essentially. Is the legal landscape or political views within the elite, within the middle class, are they changing?
Well, I mean, Bruce Golding had said that, not in his cabinet because he was reflecting the general attitudes in Jamaica, whereas other people were outraged when they heard his comment. If he'd returned to Jamaica having said something different, he would have faced strong opposition here. So he was just reflecting the general anti-gay feelings. When Portia Simpson Miller came into government, part of her election campaign was to say that she would review the buggery law, in which case she was aiming for the so-called gay vote. So yes, she was voted in, but she hasn't done anything about it. And I realized that in certain parts of the States, when she's gone to visit, they've actually been protests against her lack of human rights. But in terms of Jamaica, I mean, there are various causes of homophobia, the most blatant one being religious fundamentalism. People, although they ignore other parts of the Bible, they take on arguments about, same-sex being sinful, unnatural, sort of against God's plans. So they actually use these notions of, being subversive to Jamaica, the state, masculinity and morality as a way to justify the stigma and discrimination, which takes various forms the mildest being threats of violence, and the most obvious blatant cases being, as I mentioned before, in terms of Dwayne Jones and the university students, of actually being attacked or murdered. Another issue is the whole...
Well, wait, let me just stop you on that point, because I want to ask Elisabeth J. Friedman, actually. Annecka Marshall raised this issue of continuing religious resistance to gay rights. Where do you see that elsewhere in Latin America and other countries outside of the Caribbean? Is the Roman Catholic Church, Pentecostal churches, are they very much a powerful force in lobbying against this, or are they a diminishing force?
They are very much a powerful force, and I think it's very important that you mention Pentecostal movements as well as the Catholic Church, because they, for example, earlier Annecka mentioned the case of Brazil. They're very powerful in Brazil, and they're powerful not only in terms of the church of public opinion, but also because many legislators are openly supportive of their agenda. They themselves are Pentecostal, and they have provided a nearly complete block in terms of legislating around LGBT rights in Brazil. But I also think it's very important to realize that these are not isolated to places like Jamaica, right, or the Caribbean or Latin America. Exodus International, for example, rather Exodus Global Alliance, is a Pentecostal-linked organization out of the United States that has been behind promoting the ex-gay movement, which we might be banning here in California, but is alive and well in the United States, and it's a movement that is promoting the idea that LGBT people should somehow be able to recover from their sexual status. And they have been very powerful in Latin America. And so these are networks that aren't just located in the Global South, but are actively promoted from the Global North. And I think that those are very important things for people in the United States to be aware of.
Thank you to both of you for joining us. Up next, we're going to hear about how gays and lesbians are networking like never before on social media in Latin America. Joining us now from Uruguay is Rosario Monteverde. She's the director of GPSGAY, a social media website for LGBT people with more than 200,000 users. Rosario, thanks for joining us on Global Journalist.
No, thank you for inviting me.
Well, start out telling us about GPSGAY. What is it? Why did you start it? And how did it get so popular?
Okay, so GPSGAY is a resource for the LGBT community to bring the community and the culture online. Basically, on GPSGAY, users can interact in a social network very freely in a safe space. They can learn what places to go out to if you're in your city or visiting someplace else in Latin America or Brazil. They can also actually book gay-friendly hotels, learn about the latest news, read some articles.
So wait, just to be clear, it's not a dating website, then it's...
Yeah, no, it's actually, I mean, dating happens as it happens on any other social networks, but it's not the focus, because actually, there are really a lot of dating apps out there, and that's not what we wanted to do here. We actually wanted to be like a friendly space for everyone and not be associated to, I don't know, with pornographic content, nudes, and so on. So then dating happens. We want our users, to become friends, to date, to whatever. But it's not the main idea behind it. It's more like, bringing some other things like having fun, going out to learning things about the community.
Okay, so you post photos, you talk about your lives, entertainment. Why not?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't users just use Facebook or Instagram?
Well, as the other guests were saying, still in Latin America, although there have been a lot of advances on the gay rights and everything, there's still that thing that perhaps on the social networks you're not showing yourselves as who you are, because you may be in the closet or not, but maybe some people in your family doesn't know about you. So many people have more than one profile, and they still don't feel safe enough to actually do that there. And also because if you, like on any other group, I know if you like to go out running or whatever, you share some interests, and then it's always good to have a place where, you find people with the same interests that you have. So that's why.
And remind us just what are the main countries where people are on GPSGAY?
Well, it's all over Latin America, but most of the people are actually nowadays in Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela. Brazil is gaining up some force, but we only just started, trying to advertise it a little bit there. But also people from Argentina, Chile.
And you mentioned advertising. I understand that you've actually had some problems advertising your site. Tell us about some of the challenges you faced.
Yeah, well, for the most part, what we've been doing till now was actually do some online advertising on Facebook and Google. But the problem we had on Facebook is like, for example, there was an ad we had that was like a gay flag, rainbow flag with the word gay in there, and then that ad was banned. And it happened with several others. I mean, some were accepted and some not, but they didn't have any nudes or anything. I know it's just that maybe the gay word, perhaps it was seen, but not the right, not the target audience, maybe, and so maybe it was flagged as offensive, and yeah, some of them were actually banned, which was a surprise for us, really.
And
it happened. Yeah.
That's interesting. So people may have been clicking like the report inappropriate content button and getting your ads rejected then. Tell us just a little bit about how do people experience homophobia online? Because I do get the sense in the online world, people will say things and say things to other people that they would never say to them in public. I mean, is that the case? Is that part of what's creating space for a networking group like yours?
Yeah, of course, it depends on the countries that you're from and everything, but yeah, it happens with teenagers, it happens like maybe, for example, I'm from Uruguay, so maybe people won't be saying things to your face because at this point here, this is politically incorrect, but maybe they'll think about it, and of course, when you are, like, when there's, for example, a news that has to do with the gay rights movement, there is a lot of opposition, and that partly happens, I guess, because you're not showing your face when you're writing there. Sometimes there are anonymous comments, so that being online enables that, I guess.
And so tell us, you're in Uruguay. Tell us about your experience in Uruguay growing up. Do you get the sense that the culture has changed around how gays are treated, or is it merely the legal landscape that's shifted?
No, I mean, it definitely has changed. I started going to gay, parades like when I was 18 years old, and there were very few of us there at that time. I'm 32 now, so and today when there's like one of gay rights parades, there's really a lot of people joining, not only people from the LGBT community, but sometimes friends, family. So there's really been a change in there. I also notice it with younger people. It's like it's more natural for them. They accept it more. There's still a lot to go on that we need to do. And of course, having the legislation change doesn't automatically create a shift in the culture, but I think it really helps a lot. Like, I was out of the closet, right, with my family, my friends, work, everything. And I got married in December, a few months ago. And that was like the final really coming out for me. I cannot tell you the experience because there were, although my wife would come to me to parties in the family, whatever, but they would refer to her as, I don't know, my friend, whatever, my companion, whatever you want to call it. But this time,
So they wouldn't call her your girlfriend then?
The wedding, like, it validated everything, and it was really like finally, coming out and being able to recognize things for what they are, the relationship. So yeah, I think it helps a lot. And as more and more couples begin, getting married, whatever, I think coming out, I think the culture will continue changing for the best. So it's really, really important to have that kind of legislation there.
Elisabeth Friedman, you heard Rosario Monteverde's story. Can you just tell us where things are going to go from here in Latin America? We see that there have been some legal protections for same-sex couples initiated in Colombia and Ecuador and parts of Mexico. What do you think the future looks like over the next 5 years?
Well, over the next 5 years, I think it's going to go unevenly the way it has so far. I think there are countries that probably will have more legal protections for LGBT people. Probably they won't be complete. They'll be in particular areas. Maybe what country will have marriage equality, but they won't have protections for people based on their gender identity. I know that Uruguay has the most, or one of the most progressive pieces of legislation around gender identity recognition, as does Argentina. But I think that as we've heard from the Caribbean, parts of Central America, you're going to see very little progress in this area. But I think I would agree with both speakers, which is that it's not that the legal changes are fundamental. But as we know here in the United States, it's not just about the legislation. It's really about how profoundly the ideas of equality and acceptance of difference are rooted in our societies, and that takes the kind of activism, outreach, one-on-one discussions that any social change takes. Here in the United States these days, we are constantly thinking and sometimes revising our ideas about what's happened with the civil rights movement. It was so fundamentally important in terms of changing legislation, but when we think about how profoundly our legal system, our criminal justice system is permeated by racism, right, with police behavior here, we know that those changes are not just legal changes, and there's a lot of work to do.
Annecka, Marshall, I'll give you the last word with just about 30 seconds left. Where do you see things going in the Caribbean and Jamaica and some of these places where the situation is still quite severe for gays and lesbians?
We have LGBT activist groups which encourage open dialogue and re-education. However, there's a resistance from the majority of the population, because for them, it's questions about tolerance and acceptance, whereby it's like, okay, if they stay over there, do their own thing and don't involve me, that's fine. But anyone comes to me and, I'm likely to be confrontational. So there's a lot of work to do, and the various organizations are doing a great work, but as usual, it requires money and the political will for support, as well as the community acknowledging the fact that, for instance, gays aren't responsible for HIV/AIDS and various other myths that have been created, such as gays being seen as adding to pedophilia and things like that. So really,
we're going to have to leave it there. I'm very sorry,
told.
Annecka. Global Journalist Executive Producer is Joshua Kranzberg. Our assistant producers this week are Pablo Gabilondo and Beatriz Ciordia. Global Journalist Studio Director is Travis McMillan from RJI. Our audio engineer is Pat Akers of KBIA. For all of us at Global Journalist, I'm Jason McClure. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.